dysfunction or deprivation, and to have a sense of data which reflects the life and the culture of the groups who the data is supposed to benefit, rather than just certain kind of measures. But I think also, in many ways, queer and marginalized groups have to contend with quite complex issues of representation, visibility, and differentiated understandings of visibility. So it's not just a case of being more visible and more visible being better, or less visible being better. It's kind of like a complex choreography that's very situational and differentiated. And I think that that's one of the things that I hope to do through the chapters of the book, is kind of bring more context and more situational awareness to data practices and ways of using more of the range. The question on toxicity is very important, because you're absolutely right. It's not the case that these types of tactics and practices are only, for example, progressive. Like, you see data activism on the right and on the far right. So, for example, talking of lists, in America, you see these very prominent cases of lists of professors, lists of people to target, right? Which is terrifying, and there have been attempts between, for example, sorry, it's very distracting, the camera moving around. I like it. It's like, you got to keep noticing. But, between life on the internet and digital culture, which is maybe relevant to your question about toxicity. Not to say that this is straightforward as a way of responding to toxicity. I don't think that, for example, by investigating and also in the case of, for example, platforms and AI, the corporate structures and the tax havens and the way that money moves around, these are also part of the picture too. You could argue not just how algorithms work, but how the corporate form works as well, which has a longer bubbling history. I don't know if that...
Here I am again. So, first of all, I'm sorry for this crazy automated camera. Someone tried to fix it, but it's not working. So, I hope you're having fun with this, at least.
I'm definitely having fun. It's great. Yeah.
I'm so sorry about that. I wanted to know if anyone wants to ask any last question, because I want to make a question. No? Well, okay. Well, Jonathan, and massive investment on wind-powered data centers. Like, well, this provokes me in a sense that sometimes I think about ways of public take parts of data, and how the public can participate with this kind of data, and how this local data infrastructure make part of this kind of global platform power. So how do you think your book can help for like Brazilians and Global South readers to understand this kind of global power regarding data here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a few parts of the book that speak to this. the third chapter on forms of transnational coordination, for example, countries can be organized. It looks at hashtags, it looks at events, it looks at documents, it looks at how standards and conventions and principles arise through these kinds of coordination mechanisms. It looks at different forms of evaluation. I think evaluation is really interesting and important because evaluating for whom, right? Like, how do you test whether an arrangement is working? Who do you ask? And who is visible? And who can be identified to ask to see whether different kinds of arrangements are working? I don't think these things are straightforward, but I do think that, for example, if you look at initiatives like the Global Data Barometer, they've been thinking, I think, quite a bit about like what evaluation from the South might look like when it comes to public interest data sets of different kinds. I think it's a process, but I think they've been making efforts to work with research networks and with civil society groups which are based in the South, and to rethink evaluation from the South. I also think, it feels important to understand the politics of arrangements which are presented as being global, from UN, United Nations data sets and the kinds of histories in the League of Nations, to transnational economic relationships and the history of the corporate form, which is of course related to things like the East India Company and vehicles which are set to basically facilitate empire, right? So I think there's a lot to untangle historically in terms of standards and arrangements, and there's amazing work in data studies and science technology studies which one could draw on. I do think it seems to me that, you mentioned data centers and wind farms, for example. There are, this is a totally different project, but there are kind of really interesting entanglements between, for example, the rise of technology companies, carbon and climate commitments, things like forest restoration, and how ecological sites are being called upon as carbon sinks and carbon reduction or carbon laundering mechanisms, and how you might see that in terms of also longer histories of colonial terraformation or transforming the land and displacement of people. This is not, I think, a very straightforward answer, but I do feel that like continuing to understand those relationships between the arrangements that we're dealing with in the present and their histories, and I guess taking seriously the question of what there is and what matters and who does what to whom in the arrangements that we use to try and compose better futures. I think, the work on the pluriverse and the uncommons, for example, I find very inspiring in this regard.
Okay. We have a last question. You can come here, please.
Hi, John. Nice to meet you. My name is Alexandre. Media, when we needed to create an account and trade off our data with the platform to access this content, and that you call public data. Do you understand? If we need to trade off our data and create an account and to be inside of these social medias, in the case of the content of the social media, like this data that we create about the cultures around the world. And this data is in the internet, but we have to create an account and we have to be identified to these platforms, and we have to register ourselves to be to have this access, or to allow our access to this content.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's yeah, I feel it does relate a little bit to what I was thinking about in relation to Alan's question, which is what counts as data in relation to social and cultural life. And I guess if you look historically at methods, the politics of methods which are used to understand society and culture, you can think of things like surveys and polls and interviews, right? Like different ways of shaping the way that we know society, and different ways of shaping how the social and cultural becomes noble through instruments and through processes and devices. I think you can see, there's a lot of literature from around 10 years ago in science and technology studies. Oh, can you hear me okay? Yeah. You just saw me zooming into myself. Yeah. So like in, STS, right, science and technology studies. So I feel like there's a lot of work looking at the social lives of methods. So looking at, looking at like the way that interviews and polls arise as ways of knowing the social in different ways. Literature around that time, like I guess around 10 or more years ago, was kind of looking at social media data as another kind of method for knowing the social through apps and interfaces and platforms, right? And this is something that you see coming into, for example, spaces like the UN, taking platform data as another source of data for knowing about the social. There's a lot to unpack here, I feel. So what it means to think about the relationship between, for example, official data from public institutions, data gathered from NGOs, and data gathered from platforms, and what kind of ways of knowing the social and knowing culture are possible using these different approaches. All I'll say, sorry, I know this is a very long way of responding to your question. I feel like it's very important to remain, to keep having some critical reflection about methods and some imagination about methods, and not taking for granted which kinds of visions of the social these different kinds of methods produce, and the politics of these methods. Sorry, that's a long answer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Jonathan. Well, we have to wrap up things here, but I really would like to thank you so much for your time and for commenting your book. I think this is a very important resource for us academics and also students in terms of researching about data, about digital methods, and all this digital environment we are like interacting with. So thank you very much. I'd like to invite you to come to Brazil, to our university, if you have a chance, maybe next year. So
anytime, I would love that.
So you are very welcome. And if you want to say like last few words to say goodbye to everyone, just feel free to do this.
Yep, please. I really would love to get to know and keep in touch with you and follow your work. So if you go to my website, you can find I'm online in different places. I would really appreciate connecting with you so I can just learn more about your work and learn from the work you're doing, and find more about our shared interests. I wish I was there and we could go around the room and hear from everyone, but because we don't have time for that, if you would find me online, I'd love to hear about what you're doing and keep in touch. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
We were trying to show the audience,
Oh, wow,
but the
what's
camera is not
that?
helping.
Okay, bye. Yeah. Take care. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye. Ciao. Bye.